who is going to do our third and final session. So Lisa is the second time you've come to one of our events, which is amazing. Lisa shared so much first time, I thought it'd be rude not to invite her back. And Lisa, I'm actually really grateful to hear because, as most of you may have noticed, she's wearing a little bit of an extra accessory today. And Lisa didn't tell me that it was only Friday morning that she got all clear to drive. So as an event organiser, that would have been a scary moment. Thank you for not sharing. Lisa's going to do a little bit about resilience. So Lisa, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So when Howard asked me to talk about resilience, it's always that slightly interesting topic for me because it's such a well-known word, well-used word, but actually what we mean by resilience can mean lots of different things. And I want to sort of challenge a little bit about that today. Starting off with how resilient I am or I'm not. So this is how I got off the mountain via this helicopter that when I had this break. So those of you who can't see my lovely accessory, it's a big boot because I managed to break and dislocate my ankle at the top of a mountain. And that's my daughter who was incredibly excited at seeing a helicopter. And I have to say, it doesn't speak volumes about the number of people who say to me, so I was with my two children, 8 and 10, and my husband, and a dog. And lots of people say, your children must be really scared because I was in a lot of pain and we had mountain rescue out and the helicopter and everything else. And actually, my children could not have been happier. Honestly, it was the last day of the holiday and having to get people up stretchers, and they were bringing up, mountain rescue bringing them up sweets and cans of iron brew to keep them going, and honestly they thought it was the best thing that could have happened. But it's really interesting as to how some people thought that would be terrible, terrifying, and some people thought that would be the most amazing experience. For me, it's a real test of my resilience afterwards. So this is 7 weeks ago, and I'm someone who's always running around. I mean, I run, I cycle, I'm just outdoors all the time. I need to be going to Leah's farm. And so to stop, to not do that, and actually to be worried about whether my break was healing well enough, not being able to do the normal day-to-day stuff, like because I've been on crutches, I couldn't even carry my cup of coffee. You know, there's the normal stuff, and that really tested me. And did I have to be resilient, and was I resilient? Yes, to some extent, because I was trying to be positive, my mindset and so on, and note it pass, and trying to notice the progress and so on. But actually, those people around me had to be incredibly resilient because they were picking up the pieces of my massive emotional dips when I was very angry at everything and just not in a great place. But also there was a no to being resilient, and now I shouldn't have been resilient because I think there's always so much pressure on the fact that we have to be able to do everything, and we have to kind of, you know, have strong shoulders and just be able to cope and just be able to get on with life, whatever life throws at us. And I think we have to be able to stop and say enough is enough sometimes, and that actually stuff is too much. And I do need to take a break, and I do need to, you know, we've heard today people talking about boundaries. We do need to have boundaries around us and being able to ask for help. And for me, that was a massive deal. When everyone was saying straight away, you know, let us know what we can do with the kids, and let us know what we can do with this, that, and the other, and I was like, it's fine, I'll cope. I mean, I had actually intended to walk down the mountain. It's only when I tried standing up and he passed out that I realised I couldn't. And you have to then realise you have to ask for help, you have to know your boundaries are. So for me, resilience is a really interesting term because I worry that lots of companies, lots of people use it in a way that's actually, we have to be strong enough to cope with whatever people throw at us. And you've got to make people more resilient, so you can just throw more at them. And I think at some point we have to say, actually that's not okay. I'm this person, I'm a human being, I've got my other needs, I've got stuff going on, a lot of it you won't know about, and I have to know where to draw the line. So we have to start caring for ourselves a little bit more. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking a bit about today. So I got this card as with well wishes for getting well, which I thought was quite ironic actually, because I'm quite at home on mountains. I love being on mountains. And ironically, I'm not usually on a mountain on a path, I'm usually kind of climbing one. So to be walking down this really nice bit of path with my family and then ending up doing this was slightly annoying. So that's kind of fair enough. But what if a card were to say that? I mean, might all laugh at that going, yeah, right. But actually, I worry that too many people have this belief that actually when we go to, you know, our work environment or even our home environment or whatever our environment is, if an individual can't cope, it's about them. and it's not about the environment. And for me, that's my real worry, because it suggests that individuals who aren't coping, maybe they're not up to it. They can't cope with the pressure. You know, and we see that through all sorts of behaviours. You know, people ending up being off work with anxiety or stress or burning out. Those awkward behaviours. The number of companies, you know, I've been doing lots of work around change with leadership teams at the moment because of companies going through such a fast pace of change. And they're saying, oh, people are really awkward. They're just awkward behaviours. They're just being negative. And they're just being grumbling. They're just being this and they're just being that. And it's almost like blaming them rather than taking responsibility and looking at sort of an organisation actually what they should be doing in order to be able to support that individual. So what I'm talking about resilience, is when it doesn't matter if you're a person who works on your own, you know, if you're a solopreneur and you're just in your own business, or whether you're part of a big organisation, we all have a role to play. So I think some of you might have seen this iceberg analogy before, but I think we can all be guilty of this, and I certainly have been very guilty of this at times, kind of appearing to be okay. So on the surface, everything's fine, and isn't it great actually, remote working, how you only see this little bit of someone, and you can put on your smile, and you can appear to be doing what you need to be doing, and meeting your deadlines and so on, and everyone thinks you're okay. And I think that's when people say, actually, yeah, they're fine, they can cope with whatever we keep passing on. What people don't realise often is what's going on under the surface. And if you think about what's happened during the pandemic, that has really magnified a lot of this. And people, you know, there's been a lot of talk around mental health and well-being. I mean, there were so many webinars and so on it, go back a year, that it was almost like people getting really fed up with the terms of mental health and well-being. It's like, oh my gosh, it's that stuff again. But I always try to talk about it in a slightly different way, which is actually about getting underneath the surface. If we understand what's going on for people, we can't be that resilient if we've got all this stuff going on. And our resilience will dip when we have worries about someone's health, or when we're worrying about income, because, you know, financial well-being is a massive topic right now. And it's one of those things that people used to associate with a certain group of people who've been on low income and so on. And actually, it's the evidence kind of blows that out of the water. It's everyone across the board who's worrying about finance right now. It's causing a lot of anxiety. So there's been lots and lots of issues, and I think we know that the reality is, and I think Katrina and Jill were touching on this morning, who actually lined up the brain stuff brilliantly, so thank you. When we're carrying around loads of stuff with us, it does impact on our ability, on our emotional arousal. So we can't carry on being resilient. We can't just carry on ploughing forward and doing our best job and being organised. You know, hearing what Leah was talking about in terms of your anxiety, but having to think about so many things when you're at work, and often because, you know, we're women and we have to deal with the non-work stuff as well, you're balancing so much stuff. But when you've got that, when you're experiencing a sense of anger at a situation, or embarrassment, shame about whatever your situation is, maybe it's a housing issue, or a finance issue, or a relationship issue, whatever it is, when you're experiencing and holding on to those emotions, it impacts on your ability to think well, it impacts on your brain. And literally, I mean, you're going back to what was being talked about the brain earlier on, when you're experiencing emotional arousal, it blocks your cognitive brain, it stops your the prefrontal cortex from working well. And that's the bit where we have to be rational, and we have to problem solve to do all our goals, and we have to be able to communicate well, we have to communicate with empathy, and we have to do all the stuff that makes us good in business. Actually, that kind of gets overruled if we're carrying around a lot of emotional arousal. So we really need to start looking at what's going on underneath the surface and helping people explore that a little bit more, rather than just expecting people to get on and carry whatever they've got with them. There's a story once I used to talk to people about, where it's about that, and I think it's also quite apt with my situation, about carrying a rucksack, and, you know, you're walking a hike and someone's there taking everyone else's rucksacks because the other people are struggling. And, you know, the person who ends up taking them all on ends up taking on so much that she falls off the side of the mountain. because she's literally carrying too much. I did suggest to my husband that maybe he should have carried the rucksack rather than me, but I think we end up carrying so much and people aren't aware of what we've got in our bags. And I think that's a responsibility of the people around. You know, it's your teammates, it's your colleagues, it's the bigger part of your organisation. And if you work on your own, it's about your network. It's about knowing who those people are, who you connect with and who you trust and who you let in. Because even when you're on your own, and there's that whole, I was relating a lot to what Leah was talking about when I was setting up my business going back a few years, you feel like you've got to do it all, you feel like you've got to be able to prove yourself, and you can't show any sign of weakness, and you can't show doubt or ask questions and so on, because it's just you don't know, and therefore that undermines you. And actually we need to be able to be more open and say, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm not on form today. I was saying to someone earlier on, I woke up this morning saying to my husband, gosh, how am I going to do this today? Because I haven't slept through the night for 7 weeks since doing this, because it's been so painful. So every time I move in the night, it wakes me up. And then last night my son decided to have a nightmare, and I was up with him and all the rest of it. But you just think, gosh, I'm operating at half capacity. And I have to give myself a break, because I get really cross with myself thinking, I had all these goals, I had all these things set out, and I was stuff I wanted to do, and I was, I'm someone who's very, very driven, very motivated, and suddenly I'm having to have a really strong word in myself and say, hang on a minute, you can't do that. But I don't think people tend to do that as well and as often as they should do. But to put that now into the current state of play coming out of the pandemic. So people are trying their best, and I think people generally are trying to get back to, some people are getting back to normal, some people are saying we don't want to get back to normal, we want to bounce into something new. Whatever we're doing, for a lot of people it looks quite different. Whether you're lucky enough that your business has been carrying on, but you've got to just tweak the direction it's going in a little bit, or whether you're doing something completely different. And some people are quite resistant to that, because that's the speed of change. People are feeling exhausted. And that whole fighting to keep your role going, or your company going, or having to keep moving, changing direction, it is exhausting. And if you think about change, if you think about which hand you brush your teeth with, and you can probably brush your teeth without any conscious thought at all. Now imagine brushing your teeth with the opposite hand. It's really clunky. It takes a lot of effort, because you're having to consciously do something, whereas a lot of stuff that we do all the time out of habit, you don't give it any conscious thought. And so if you're doing stuff because it's routine, it's normal, you have all these neural connections in your brain, which means you don't even have to think about it, it just happens. When you can drive somewhere, this is the worry bit, when you drive somewhere and you get to where you're going, and you haven't even thought about the driving, the bit in between, it just almost happens, because you're so familiar with how to do something. So when we have a lot of change, it is exhausting. And I think right now we tend to forget, we're coming out of a pandemic, and in a work environment, we're having to really think about what that means for us at an emotional level. So it's not just operational, it's not just, how do we do our marketing, or how do we now meet our clients, or it's not the functional stuff. We need to get behind the scenes and look at the emotional stuff. And so the why, and this goes back to something that Katrina and Jill were talking about this morning about goals. The why is a really fundamental question. It's a human need. We need to know why we're going to do something, and that's the number one rule of being clear about why you're going to do something. So when someone's going through a change, and this might, think about these questions, whether it's for you and you're thinking about these questions and how they relate to you, whether it's about a team of people around you. How well are you able to answer these questions? How much thought or how much time have you given these questions? Because not many people do. They tend to focus on the goals in terms of the what next, without thinking about the emotional side of the journey. And if we don't look at the emotional side of the journey, then we're really not giving people their best chance in terms of being resilient. Because you can be dragging someone from here to here, but if they're carrying a massive rucksack full of all this stuff going on underneath the surface, then they're going to burn out pretty quickly, or they're just going to resist because it just feels too much. And of course, if people don't have their questions answered and they're worried, then we end up with experiences, again, people feeling overwhelmed, being off work, got this amazing new concept in your company, I want to do this, I want to do this, but actually you end up potentially burning out. What I'd like you to do is just, with someone next to you, is just to talk about whether you have given any thought to these kinds of questions for yourself, or within your team, within your company. Are you able to answer these questions? I mean, you don't have to go through and actually try and answer them all now, but just to have that sense of, actually, have we even thought about the emotional side of what we're going through right now? So just, I'm going to give you literally just 2 minutes just to have a chat with someone next to you. I guess for me, one of the big questions about these questions is, firstly, do you give them any time in your company? And this is just a few examples, there's a whole bigger agenda here, but how much time do you give to finding out this, and how does that feel for you? But also, what difference does it make if these questions are answered positively to how well people perform and engage at work? So you know that the response to these questions will entirely determine how people show up at work, and how people engage with each other, and how well their own sense of well-being is. So actually these sorts of questions are really important, and although you might be confident about being able to answer them, depending on your role in a company, are you confident that your colleagues, your teammates, will be able to answer these questions? Because that's a whole different story, and I think often we make assumptions about, yeah, of course people know what the change is going to look like, of course they know what their role is going to be, and of course it's okay if they make mistakes because we're doing something new. But we make assumptions all the time and rarely check them out. And everyone has a very unique way of looking at a situation. You know, go back to the first photograph, the helicopter, people in this room would all look at the same image and you can all take something different from it, you all interpret it in different ways. So we have to remember that everyone's experience is unique and it's valid, and we only know that if we find out and check it out. So we need to ask these questions, we need to be having that conversation. And in order to be able to have this conversation in a way that's authentic, because there's no good, you know, got my clipboard out and I'm going to start asking you, so do you understand what your role's going to be, and you know, kind of going down it in that sense. You need to be able to have a culture which is about feeling safe to do so. And I talk a lot about a culture of psychological safety, which is where people can feel empowered and they can be themselves, they can be honest, and they can say, you know what, I'm absolutely exhausted today, I'm only working at 30%, and that's fine, but you know you get more than 100% from me another day. Or I'm really confused about this, or actually I know you suggested that, but I can see a better way of doing it. So when you have that environment where people start to be really honest, that's when people are going to start to be open about what's going on under the surface. Because it's no good expecting people to open up about what's going on under the surface for them, if actually that's not a kind of culture that exists. And I think that's the danger sometimes when people go on these lovely well-being workshops or mental health workshops or performance workshops or whatever you want to call it, employee engagement workshops, and then they go back and they're like, yeah, I know what I need to be asking, or I know I need to be meeting with my team once a week now rather than once every 6 months, but they don't really have the right dialogue. And if you think about a stat I was looking at last week, I think it was, accidental managers, 68% of managers say they are accidental. So they have not been given the skills to be able to manage any of this and have those kind of conversations. And lots of people will be great at it automatically, but lots of people won't. So we need to be very mindful of creating an environment where we're looking at that. So in terms of thinking about psychological safety, if you imagine a number 10 is like the perfectly safe, environment to be in, where you can be completely yourself, and the number 1 is that prickly environment where actually you have to, you have to keep everything hidden. You have to just be seen to perform. It's really high stress, and it's really interesting when you work, when you have experience of both ends. Think about where you would put your company, whether that's just you on your own in terms of being able to be authentic and you feel safe to be yourself, ask questions, challenge and so on, those people around you who you work with, because unless you're right at the early stage, you hopefully will be using other people around you and their services. Think where you are and think about where you would want to be. But the biggest and the most important question is actually to think about where your team or those around you would say you are. Because I think another really, really good question is when I ask this to managers or leaders, they're like, oh yeah, we're about an 8. And they're really good at telling you why. And then you ask the people, the employees, the people in the team, and they're like, oh, maybe 4, maybe a 5 on a good day. And actually probably depends on our manager. So we have to start having the conversations around what that looks like. So whose responsibility is it to think about resilience in the workplace? It's everybody's. But again, it's another thing, it's a bit like the kind of well-being, it gets fitted into that well-being umbrella, which kind of gets fitted into, maybe it's the HR function, or maybe you've got someone who's in charge of mental health first aid, so we'll give it to them, and it gets something sort of pigeonholed off. And so I think you have to be mindful of, you won't have all these people necessarily in your company, depending on how big your company is, but you'll be, if you don't have your own HR person or an HR function, you'll certainly be hopefully using HR consultants or HR companies. So everyone has their part to play, and we have to start joining the dots. We can't keep saying, this is about someone's job, this is this person, this is this person. We have to all take a role in building resilience. And so we have to join the dots, and we have to have a strategy that pulls it all together. And I'm not going to go through all this in huge detail, but for example, leaders have to be aligned and confident about what's happening. And actually, you think that'd be automatic, but how often have people sat down and really thought about where they're going to and how they're getting there in terms of that journey, the emotional side of the journey? How to managers to feel okay about looking after themselves? Because we're asking them to look after teams of people. So whether you're a manager or a leader, are you looking after yourself? And are you able to look out for the right behaviours and what's going on with their team to know when there's a problem, when someone's got too much in their bag? Mental health roles, people might be given that responsibility, but how does that actually turn to practice? Individual employees, now this is a really interesting one. So again, this comes back to individual responsibility. I've seen so many people go to workshops where they're given these amazing strategies. And it might be, you need to stand up from the desk once every hour, you need to stretch, you need to go and this, you need to go and do that. And then they'll say at the end, but I haven't got time to do it. But actually, if your company, and particularly if you're the boss, if you're really looking after your own well-being, if you're really interested in being more resilient and actually keeping your head in a good place and keeping your body in a great place in terms of being able to cope with what's being thrown at you, you've got to look after you. So that means you have to prioritise the strategies that you're hearing about and actually use those to reduce your emotional arousal. Because it's like the number of conversations, particularly when been working with some people in banking in the city, and it's so full on, it's like real burnout territory. So we don't have time to do anything, we just have to get on with this. But you look at productivity over a day, and it really, really drops off very well within a couple of hours. So we've got to look at how we join the dots, and we all have a part to play in that. So it doesn't matter, like some people say, well, it's only me in this big organisation, what can I do? And I always think about this quote: it doesn't matter who you are and how small you think you are and how insignificant you think your role is, you can have an impact that's quite lasting if you're brave enough to speak up. So I'm going to leave it there, but I would say just think about, for you, what resilience means and how to start making steps for yourself and those around you in terms of being more resilient in a way that's really about nurturing the individual and not holding them accountable to being able to throw all stuff at them. Is that all right?